thank you all for being here, being faithful members and faithful participants of this ministry. And we're going to have a whole different story, and actually a whole story that was rewritten at 3:30 this morning. Inspiration from a nudging, very hard shove from the Holy Spirit. So this is Laura Rosshoff. She's been one of the new members. She's been here a couple of years, and we will hear her story. And you may not have seen her that much because COVID has kept us all away, and so she attended much, remotely, but put a name to her face, and we'll hear her story. All right, good God, thank you for the blessing of Laura, and this is what she has brought to this church, and thank you for the inspiration you've been to her, and keep it coming. You name it.
Amen. So I'll just say my faith journey's been long and bumpy. I think all of us have had that long and bumpy piece. But I feel totally awesome about where I am in my faith journey right now. Part of it for me is always having a community of people I can worship with, that I can relate to, and that I can count on. And I found that here at First United as a new member. So that means a lot. I grew up in the church. I have been a member of 13 Presbyterian churches in my lifetime. It runs long and it runs deep. My dad's side of the family was Methodist. My mother's parents were Presbyterian. We ended up with the Presbyterian. Give you an idea, my grandmother has been executor of Presbytery, so is my mother. Grandfather was a lay minister. Everyone in the family is ordained. And has served in multiple different roles. And I laughed because I was talking with my mother. She got a call this last week asking to serve as clerk of session in the last church that I had in high school. And she's been in that same church for a number of years, and we'll leave it at that. And she's like, I'm just not sure what to do. And I said, pray on it. If he doesn't come in, knock you with a 2x4, then you got your answer. Then you know what the answer is. And so she's still struggling with that today. But when Terry asked me to do this, I struggled with, well, what is the message I want to share today? And what I'm going to say is, and we've heard this all along, this is a journey. And my journey's been bumpy. And there's been times where I've wanted nothing to do with Christ. So we ask, when do we accept Christ? There are 4 major times in my life that I can say, I know, and I truly went and recommitted myself to Christ. It's not that I don't do it every day, but I actually went and sought the ability to reconfirm and recommit. And so that's kind of what I wanted to share with you guys today, was kind of some of those key journeys. So I lived a storied childhood. I grew up moving every 4 years, but luckily we usually lived in military towns. And so there were a lot of military kids who moved. So those are the kids I ran with. I have a lot of friends. It's funny because, like I said, Terry said, I woke up at 3:30 this morning. One of those friends from high school splits her time between Wisconsin and Paris. She's got a PhD in English and is a tenured professor at the University of Wisconsin, but she spends half her year in Paris. They've got a place there. So this morning when I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do, I called her because it was actually late enough, like 10:30 there, so she could talk to me. And she said, well, what is it you're supposed to be, what do you feel like you're supposed to be saying? And I said, I'll just tell you, I keep coming back to the time after high school and after college when I recommitted. But I'm going to tell you, the first time I committed to Christ was when I became, for those of you who are older in the Presbyterian Church, we didn't have that open table for the younger kids. You had to go through your getting your voting rights and having the rights. I remember arguing with my mother. I was 8 years old, but I wanted to go through confirmation. Normally you're 10 or 12, right? Nope. I said, I'm going to do it now, and I want to do it this year when the class was starting. And by the way, I'd already gone and talked to the minister about doing this without talking to my mother first. And so the minister was on board with me doing this. And so my mother's like, you're not old enough. And he said, let's just let her go through the class and see how it goes. And he came out the other end and he said, man, she knows more than most of the other kids do. So I was able to get confirmed when I was 8 and I became a voting member. So that was important enough to me that I wanted to commit when I was 8, that I went and sought out what it would take to be able to take communion, to be able to be a member of that church, in what I understood at that time to be a full member of that church. So when I need something, when I look for something, I search for it until I find it. And that persistency is what's gotten me through a lot. Again, storied childhood. I moved somewhat. I had a chance to study in Paris. I studied some in Africa in high school. It was great. Learned a lot of things. But I will share with you, in Africa, I was there before apartheid was repealed. It was something I never, ever, ever understood, how people could treat other people like that. And I actually got sent back early because I could not toe the line of what was expected of an individual. I didn't care who you were. You said yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. You treated people with respect. I wasn't supposed to, the help that was around the house, the family didn't want them treated with respect. And I just abhorred it. And so I was sent back after 6 weeks. I also came back and became an activist to help raise money for the Black Africans, to help them with whatever they needed. Not for guns, please don't. but a lot of prayers, a lot of education to understand what was happening there. My short time there was very traumatic, but also empowering, and learned a lot. But I also learned through friends that there was a lot of mission work that was done, and it was really amazing the amount of love that was in many of the communities and shared throughout those communities. I'm not going to say it wasn't hard, but man, God got them through a lot of things they wouldn't have gotten through otherwise. And it was interesting to see how God shined in those communities. When I graduated high school, I don't know if any of you remember Bruce Kimball, who may have coached here at New Trier. He was a silver medalist in 1984. He decided to drive drunk. I was where he hit and killed 2 kids, maimed 6, and multiple others were killed. He decided to drive drunk. Now, I'm going to tell you, we were stupid teenagers, we were hanging out and drinking at the end of a dead end street on an area where they were just building up. But what's interesting is my class was a very unique one. We had a very active SAD. I was actually the designated driver for myself and my 4 best friends. I had had nothing to drink, stone cold sober. And something said I needed to go. So I collected my girlfriends and we left. 15 minutes later, he plowed in and, like I said, killed 2 people, injured 6. Consider myself lucky. I needed to get away from that, from being at home. So I made the decision to go away to school. So I went to the University of Florida. 2 years later, Danny Rollins hit. Mass murder, 5 individuals. One of the killings occurred 2 apartments down from where I lived. You want to talk about questioning your relationship with God? Where's God in all of this? Yeah, he got me out of it, I would say. But people I knew, people I cared for, really caused me to question. I turned away. I'll be really honest. I walked away for a few years. And it was about 3 years later. It's like, something's missing. Something's not right. And I asked the question, what is it I need? And I'm like, God damn it. And it's like, all right, so God's telling me it's time to come back. And so with that, I recommitted to church. And what's funny is my 4 best friends from high school, from the church I went to, and I all reconnected. We didn't really lost touch. We kept in touch, but we reconnected. And the 4 of us vacationed every other year together for quite a while. But I'll give you an idea of how diverse we are. So you heard I called Claire in Paris. So she's West. Then I have a girlfriend who is the head violinist in Boston for the Boston Orchestra. That's the 3rd one. And then the 4th one was a former military and now is a PhD in business and consults in Atlanta and spends a quarter of her time in Costa Rica still doing missionary work. So that's how diverse the group is of the women I grew up with. That's the first group I called when I realized I'd lost something. I need it. And they're like, well, first off, what are you doing with God? And I'm like, God damn it. Mumbling under my voice. So they said, okay, we need to get a girls' weekend together. None of us had kids, none of us had any, we may have had husbands, but we could get away for a weekend. So we all got together. And I remember we were in Myrtle Beach and we spent some time talking. And God, did we talk? And did we talk? And the next thing I knew, they're like, well, it's time to go home. So what are you going to do? I said, yeah, it's time to recommit. God damn it. So I started this conversation when I was 24 with God, which I still carry on, I think, constantly today. I think it's even more constant today. That prayer never stops. If I need something in the middle of the day, I realize I've already asked for it without even thinking about it. And I've become more intentional as time goes on with my prayer. So that was the second time I recommitted. The third time really was after that, I got married. It was a short marriage. Ended up with a ex-husband who was abusive in many ways, had a couple of affairs on me. Typical stupid shit, but I wasn't putting up with it. So I got rid of it. Of course, everything else went sour at the same time, right? And so I decided I was done with God again. So God and I took a hiatus for about 18 months. And I will say, I took the hiatus, God didn't take the hiatus. But then I decided at the end of 18 months, I'm like, God damn it, something's missing again. And I know what it is. I don't want to hear it. I just got to get back to it. So I started praying again. And I found an updated church home for where I was at that time. I was actually out in Naperville or out in Lyle. So I ended up at Knox Presbyterian Church out there. And if any of you know that church, it's a huge church. We had about 1,200 active members at that time. And if you couldn't find a program to fit into, you weren't looking. But I found a great group of people there that helped me with my faith journey and helped me get back into it. And while I was out there, I led probably 4 small groups and had activity and just really kind of recommitted myself back to God, but also learning and reading my Bible daily. And it was a great group of people. Well, then it was time to move. God dang it. I was happy where I was, but it was time to move and I moved to Indianapolis. And that was okay. It was there a short period of time. But again, my mother taught me, anything you move, you go find a church home. That's the first thing you find. So I found a small church. It was great, had a great group of people. And things didn't quite work out there, but that was okay. And I ended up back in Florida. And then I decided I needed to explore the world. So I did. I lived in a 10-year period. I basically took contract work throughout the US and around the globe. So I lived with my mother, quote unquote. That was my permanent address. I have an address when you were never home. I lived in San Francisco for 6 months, got paid for it. They paid for my apartment. Great. Spent 5 months in New York, spent 5 months in London. I spent 6 months in Mumbai. So it was great. I got to travel the world and learned a lot about myself. But the other thing I got to do was explore other religions and met a lot of great people. And when I was in India, I was very interested in learning more about Hindi. So I had the opportunity and kept coming back to, that just doesn't meet who I am. Kept coming back to that. And I'm like, okay, so I'm going to know a little more. But people were always like, but you come to our service, you come participate, but you don't pray with us. You don't do this, you don't do that. And I said, y'all don't share my exact beliefs. I said, we share some common things, some common values. And I truly appreciate that. And they're like, yeah, but we have other people who come who will pray with us anyway. I'm like, but that's not my God. That's not what I believe. And that's when I really realized I had truly accepted standing in the middle of a bunch of other people who believe something other than I believed, and standing up and being able to say, no, I'm not going to participate in that portion of their activity, but they have that right themselves to do that. But what was interesting is because I didn't do it and I didn't make a big scene of it, people who got to know me asked me about it, which gave me the opportunity to tell them about my journey and about God. And what's interesting is I ended up having 7 people convert to Christianity from Hindu. And now try being a Christian in the middle of Mumbai, trying to find a Christian church to help these people because I knew I was needed. And I found some missionaries and some others who would take them in and help them do more connection and continue their growth and learning. And all of them are still active with that. It's a small church. It's got about 250 members in Dubai. They've gone non-denominational so they can accept any of the Christian belief systems in. But I'm like, if I can stand and share with others, I didn't do it by being loud and bold. I did it by just being silent and watching. But I was also accepting and not trying to be judgmental of their faith. But because I didn't partake, they wanted to know why. And I found, if any of you know me, can be very loud and boisterous. For me to be silent and just listen was huge. And that's when I learned that sometimes the silence is more important than what we say. And in that moment, in that reflection, after I came back and learning, it's like, God damn it, God, you just have stuck around no matter what I do. Can't get rid of it. That foundation is always there. It was built, I grew up in it. And I guess I was lucky. So I didn't refine it. But when I came back from this, I'll call it my sojourn 10-year period after my divorce, I decided I really did want to find what was my next step in life. I wanted a family. I wanted the traditional thing. So I found a job back here in Chicago, lived down the place downtown, lived downtown. And so I decided to start dating on apps. You know, that's when apps started years ago. And it was really funny because my girlfriends that I talked about before, the 4 of them, decided to put a list together on a spreadsheet of what the attributes of my husband would need to be.
Oh my God.
And laugh though you may, 110 lines later, we had the list. Oh, and by the way, they said into date 1, you should be able to answer these questions, yes. At the end of date 2, this. And at the end, so we had it, and just so you know, all of us have very much more of a scientific mind mostly versus the creative mind. So I laugh. And they would know every time I had even just a coffee date. And so I met my husband online, Rich, for those of you who have met him. Wonderful man. But man, did not know how to date. Gosh, did not know how to date. So we're talking, we meet online, we exchange the cord via email, and then we start talking. And then I'm like, well, let's meet for coffee. He says, I don't do coffee. I'll take you to dinner. I'm thinking, we need to meet someplace so if it doesn't work, like in an hour, you can escape, right? He said, no, you gotta come, wait, let's go to dinner. I'm in the city, and actually he had bought the house from his parents. So, you heard me talking about moving and jaunting around the world. My husband's parents bought the house that he bought from them in 1962. He's lived in that house all but about 10 years of his life, 4 years away at college. And then he didn't his parents weren't ready to move. So he bought a townhouse out in Schaumburg for a little while, bought that. When his parents decided it was time to retire and move to Arizona, he bought the house from his parents. So understand, when I married my husband, it's like, and come with house and live in Oak Park. It's part of the vows. But where I'm going with this is I said, fine, I agree. I'll come to dinner. Any of you know the old pasta shop that was over on Oak Park Avenue? It was a restaurant over there. I figured dinner was an hour and 15 minutes. 3 hours later, we actually had to end our date because of the fact they were closing. And he said something about, well, maybe we should get together next weekend. And I'm like, okay, that works. And I get a call. He says, I'm sick. I can't make Friday night. Okay, I know where this is going, right? We're already making excuses. Now, I want y'all to understand that when I came back to Chicago, I was serious about finding somebody. So I actually lined up on one Saturday, 7 different coffee meetings at 7 different Starbucks around the Chicagoland area with 7 different men. So I was intent upon finding some people to date. I was on a mission. I got some great friends out of it, some people that I still communicate with today. And actually they're married and have kids, and we actually get together with them. But my husband and I, and the following weekend, I already knew I was out of town. So it was 4 weeks before I saw my husband again. I still thought we would be friends at that point, not anything further. They finally asked me out on a 3rd date. We're on a 3rd date. At this point, he hasn't tried to kiss me, hasn't tried to hold my hand, hasn't tried to do anything. So I finally, and we're walking around downtown Chicago, I finally looked at him and I said, what are you expecting out of this? Are you just wanting to be friends and hang out? Or are you wanting some, well, I thought we were dating. And I looked at him, I said, you haven't held my hand, you haven't tried to kiss me. None of the traditional type of things. And I'm like, this is when I knew I had a good guy. But at that moment, he looked at me and said, well, what am I supposed to be doing that I'm not doing? He didn't know about the spreadsheet. But there was a call after each date to see what he had ticked off of the list. And I do want you to know, at my bachelorette party, they presented me with the spreadsheet with every date I had. Even if it was just a coffee date, that person was going across the top with the check marks and yes and no's going down it. I must admit, my husband checked 92% of the boxes my girlfriends laid out. So if you want to talk about 3 other friends that can know you from a long time, I have that. But all of them are extremely strong in their faith. So my husband and I got married. I was active at First United over in Oak Park. They went through major changes with leadership, and I just couldn't connect anymore. So I kind of like veered off again, let life take over, get back to that task. I was married, we're trying to have kids, we're trying to do all this other stuff. I had a sister-in-law that had a young child, and the father was not active with her. So we would take my niece every other weekend just so she could have some downtime for herself. Plus it was great fun to have my niece. And just so you know, there were arguments between my husband and I and the other aunt who got her on what weekends, just so y'all know. Because she was the only one at the time. And I looked at it, it was great practice, but not only that, Catherine just was a phenomenal young lady, just phenomenal. And so Catherine gets to be about 1 or 2 years old, and I'm like, something's missing here for her, for me. I'm like, crap, God damn it, you're hitting me up again. And so God, through this blessed little girl, showed me the way back to him again. And so we started she and her mom wanted to attend First United, so I went with them. I just never really connected. The 2 of them connected, they're still active there today. She's in the youth group, she loves it. And it's a home for them. And I couldn't find it at the time, but I knew I needed to find something. So I kept searching, tried out some churches, and then I came to Burke Forest. But I will say this, when I came in, Lois, you wouldn't let me escape for anything, anything. The first 3 weeks I came. And but what I want to say is, when I had told God I knew I needed to find a church home and a group to be active with, I asked him to guide me and that sort of thing. We went online, and what's really funny is, of course, I go to the Presbyterian churches. Okay, sorry. It's what you grew up with. River Forest came up first. I don't know if you guys have ever looked on Yelp. Okay, sorry, look on Yelp. The reviews of this church are just phenomenal and they're glowing, even on Yelp. So where I'm going with this is, I looked at some of the others. I actually looked at Presbyterian USA to see how big the churches are, because I usually know that a smaller church is either a hit or miss. And I'm like, let's just go with a bigger church. So I'm like, okay, God, you're telling me my normal criteria for USAA, River Forest Presbyterian, all right, I got it. It's time to recommit to a church now. And so I come And then I'm like, then he hit me with COVID, hit all of us with COVID. God didn't hit us, but we got COVID. So my journey stalled just a little bit during that time. Just I attended via webinar, via Zoom, we all did. And it was kind of that steady state. And then I get this call from Paul saying, hey, we're going to get the new member group going again. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. But what I didn't know is there was such a phenomenal group of people who were joining at that time. And not only did I meet great people who were already here, but that group of people that I was in the new member class with were just phenomenal. And what I want to say is, whether they realize it or not, they continue to help me grow in my faith. We have our own little small group. When's our next meeting, by the way? Sorry.
Coming up on your time frame.
But what I'm saying is that's continued. And then I also want to say something made me to go to the women's retreat this time. And man, shame on you, woman. Shame on you. She challenged my prayer and challenged me to find ways, because one thing I realized is I prayed a lot, but my prayers were not as intentional as I needed to be. Being a mother, being a wife, working full time, all of those things get in the way. And what I loved is many things I already know or know that I should be doing, but y'all challenge me to bring those back into my faith journey. But I also see you each witness them on a weekly basis and share those. And I just cannot thank you guys enough for sharing this journey with me. That's my faith journey. I can tell you a whole lot more. I mean, I'm so excited this week about Vacation Bible School. I'm sad that my daughter and I won't be here this week for it, just due to some other commitments. But I'm just going to tell you, every week we come back, it's like there's a little more life in this church. Just a little bit more, a little bit more. I'm like, God, if we keep going on this trajectory, where are we going to go? Where are we going to go as a family? Where are we going to go individually? How do we bring our people along on the journey? But the one challenge I have for all of us, and it's my challenge, is how do we bring more people into this journey with us? And so I actually have a conversation coming up with my sister-in-law, my niece that I so absolutely adore. Many of you may know her, but not realize you know her, Catherine Nichols. If any of you know her, if any of you are familiar with the cookbook that came out for Beyond Hunger, that was done about 3 years ago now, she did it as her capstone project for children's school. She thought she'd raise $1,000. She's now at currently $68,000 with that one endeavor. That one endeavor has her thinking about things, and she's actually writing a second cookbook right now for Beyond Hunger to do the next wave of fundraising for them. This child is 16 years old. She is just a phenomenal, phenomenal kid. She doesn't know what she wants to do when she grows up. I'm like, I don't care. Whatever you're going to do, all you got to do is put your mind to it. But I look at her and I see God shine through her. With the work she's done Beyond Hunger and other things. So the next thing for me in my faith journey is, how do I witness even more to people than I witnessed to today? Because the one thing I found out is I'm standing a lot of times among people who share my beliefs. How do I witness those even more in a different way? And I challenge all of us to say, how do we continue to grow in our own faith journey? But how do we take that and grow? And when we talk about growing, it's plants produce seeds or they produce saplings. They produce a lot of different ways. How do we grow or help someone else grow? And so that's the challenge I have for you here today. And so I'm going to turn the tables on you guys and ask you, with all the sessions we've had some great speakers, some great faith journeys. I want to know how you plan on taking what you've heard and taking that back into your own faith journey. So who would like to volunteer to share? I guess y'all weren't expecting, do you remember I told you? I'm gonna pick on Mark because he's sitting in the back and I told him I'd pick on the back.
It's interesting to hear the different stories that come along, and be on the spot here, okay. I also am the same thing. I'm surrounded by people who are already in the faith, and so I need to find a way to find others outside the faith. I must say that I have been inspiring to a particular person who already has been in the faith, but he just says that I've been very helpful to him in the last couple of years. So that makes me feel like I'm doing something, but I haven't led anybody to Christ, and that's something that I would like to try to reach out and do, but I haven't found anybody on the outside looking in that I can do that with yet. So, but that is an inspiration that you guys have. You said you led those Hindus to Christ. That was very powerful, and I think I'd love to do something like that. But
That you know about.
today, yeah.
You really have. I have a question. So for me to think about you as an 8-year-old committing your life to Christ, and to be so bold that you're like, I don't care how old the other kids are at my confirmation class, I'm ready. So we have VBS this week, okay? I'm gonna be with 8-year-olds, okay? So what was it that kind of turned you as an 8-year-old to say, yeah, this is where I want, and I guess that's our challenge for VBS in general. You know, this is a short period of time, but you know, we're planting the seeds, and so give me a little insight into your 8-year-old mind. And hey, how old is your daughter?
9.
9. So you have a little insight into your age of
Yes.
mind
You
currently.
wanted to
So-
vote, didn't you? That's the reason. You wanted to have a voting member.
Actually, I wanted to be able to take communion. That's really what it was. Because at that point in time, the table was not open unless you were confirmed. So there has been a change in that in the church since that time. So for me, it was, I wanted to take communion. I don't think I really understood what the voting component really was, being a true member of the church from a voting perspective. Because I voted however my mother voted. You know, but to answer your question, why did I want to be able to do it? Number one, at that point in time, I had started going to sleepaway camps, and all of them were Presbyterian retreat related, if that makes sense. And I'm like, my gosh, I truly believe that Christ died on the cross for my sins. I believe that the Holy Spirit moves me on a daily basis. And I did not get through a dinner. I couldn't get through a family discussion with what are the theological implications of that. That was my mother's favorite question to me. It didn't matter what movie I went to see. She's like, well, what were the theological implications of that? And I just went to see Bambi. And I'm like, so I grew up reading the Bible. I grew up having strong witnesses around me. And I think part of it is, I already believed it. And why couldn't I then participate in the sacrament for that reason?
But it sounds like just because of that, with the theological implication, scenario, is like you were always challenged.
Yes.
Your family said, okay, what do you truly believe? And was encouraging you to
Yes.
form a belief.
And then not only that, it was, how are we going to be of service to our communities or people around us? How are we going to witness that in what we do daily? When I was 8, we lived in Memphis, Tennessee at that time. And I still remember Vacation Bible School. We were in Presbyterian Church. Don't ask me the name of it. I do not remember it right this minute. But it was a big white church, and they had the old gymnasium that had the stage at the end of it. If you guys remember the schools like that and stuff. And that's where we had Vacation Bible School. And I remember someone said, well, I'm not sure if Jesus was there. And I looked at him and I said, Jesus died on the cross. There is no question about that. And that's the way it is. And I was 6 years old at the time. And my mother still remembers that to this day. And I was staunch. I stomped my feet and I would not be moved. And my mother knew at that point, okay, she believes, there's not a question about it. When we were 8, I was in Virginia. And we had just moved. And it's like, I'm done with this. You just moved me. I've done what you wanted to do, parents, because I didn't get a choice. This is what I want. And so part of me was, I already made that decision. And it was just actually getting it approved within the church. And that was what you had to do at that time. And it's really funny. I laughed. My daughter brought with her, it's funny, last year she asked me about some of my own journeys and stuff. So she actually has my confirmation Bible now. And she's actually been trying to read it, and she's still in the Old Testament, but that's okay. She started at the beginning and is reading it straight through. I'm letting her take it on her own. And, it's really interesting, the word choice differences from the 1970s than from today, shall we say. And if you know anything about Grace, love her to death. My daughter is an interesting child. She has ADHD with high functioning autism and tests very high on an IQ perspective. But the problem is when you have autism and ADHD, you have a thing called rigidity, which means she has a hard time with gray. So her latest question and challenge to me, and I just told her you deal with it after Vacation Bible School because I need some help from Paul on this one. How do I rationalize creationism with evolution for a 9-year-old at a level she will understand? So those are the types of questions I deal with at home when it comes to the Bible. And she's having a real hard time right now with Esau having given away his birthright. She's like, why does the oldest son get everything? That's not right. That's not the way it should be. Well, what if there was an older girl? I'm like, sorry, she didn't get it. Well, that's not the way it should be. That's not fair. So it's really been, my journey is a lot about also passing on my beliefs to my daughter or helping her come to her own beliefs, if that makes sense. And it's fun to watch that, but it's also interesting to watch her try, and we all have done this, and I think it's even harder as adults sometimes to rationalize things or kind of don't dig into things of what is politically correct today versus what's in the Bible versus which version of the Bible are we going to read? which translation? And those are all things we struggle with, and I think that's part of the journey. I also think that's part of the fun part of the journey because that's what you get to pray on. That's what you get to contemplate. And honestly, we'll never have the answers. Never have the answers. But I will say this, one of the things in all of this search that I've done, I went to call my mom and a few months ago when Terry Gell originally approached me on this and asked her, my grandparents were known for writing everything, my mother's parents. So she sent me the 14 notebooks of all of their sermons and of all of their own faith journeys that they had written at 7 different times throughout their lifespan. What my mother didn't know is they'd asked her the same questions around her own faith journey. So they typed those notes up too. So I have my mother's faith journey, and it's been interesting exploring each of our own journeys, how they're like, but very different, if that makes sense. But also some of the struggles that each of us went through. I'll be honest, I question today, am I in putting in my own interpretation, or am I really hearing God? Or am I hearing what I want to hear? And I sometimes have started to think silence is a good thing. But silence usually means it needs to be a pause and another thought. So I leave you with silence is a great thing. Silence I struggle with, but silence I also ask for. Because it's those silent moments where we can actually sit and listen. Shame on me. Um, But it's those silent moments where I actually find more answers than I find questions. Now, a lot of times I find questions, don't get me wrong. But an answer may lead to more questions, but I got an answer. So I'm gonna continue this journey. My gosh, I don't know how much further I have to go, but man, it's been a bumpy ride, but it's been a great ride. I just look forward to where it goes, and I look forward to sharing it with you guys.
Question, so the two incidents we had, the Bruce Kimball incident and the apartment incident, did you feel like that was the Holy Spirit saving you for something? And like, a lot of people have like survivors and say, okay, why wasn't it me that got hurt or killed? And it's like, you have a higher purpose for you to feel that way.
There was a sense at a time of survivor's guilt. That was a lot of what I dealt with. At a later date, yeah, I had some higher purpose. I kind of started to feel that like when I spent time in Mumbai with just, actually I was working there and just decided, met people and they invited me into their homes, so I went. But it still causes questions for me today to say, I can tell you everyone that he impacted, Bruce Kimball, from that event, and it had repercussions of two people I graduated with and knew. One of them happened to live across, his parents, they lived across the street from my parents, because I'd already left home at that. And he happened to have proposed to his high school girlfriend. They were waiting 3 years both to finish school. They'd already started planning their wedding. One kid who was seriously injured, his leg was severed, lost his full ride scholarship, and ended up not going to college at all because his parents couldn't afford to send him. So he lost his educational opportunity for that reason. And those are the people that I remember that impact where I am today. And I can tell you where those people are today, because it burned that much into my memory. Unfortunately, during that period, there was a few other losses as well, but those were the big ones. And you talk about being in college and thinking you're invincible because you're in that 16 to 24 years of age when you're in that invincible period. I lost a total of 8 classmates during that period. And that strikes you at the core to say, is there really a God? And what is his purpose if he's letting these people get struck down and killed in these ways? And it's tough. It's really tough. I'm not going to say it's not tough to deal with today. But what I will say is I've moved on. There's probably a purpose that he had. I don't think God intended for any of them to get killed. I think people using their own free will made bad decisions, and that was the choice that they made. And it impacts us who may be making the right decisions, and we can't change other people's free will and their choices. And all I can do is impact today, this moment, and try and leave a lasting impression based upon that. And that's what I really come down to, is trying to live within that moment. God, do I have a hard time doing that? Yes.
Would you share a little of what your husband's faith journey is?
My husband's family grew up Catholic. He attended Ascension, and he went to OPRF. My husband really hasn't attended a church on a regular basis. I've been bringing him slowly but surely to First Pres, and he's like, I'm like, hey, we're gonna be doing this, you wanna come with me? And so I've gotten him involved in a few things, and we're seeing him more and more often. Whether y'all know it or not, you're working into his skin. He just doesn't fully realize it yet. But he and I are having more great conversations around what we believe and those types of things. So Terry, actually, this prompted probably, I don't know how many hours of conversation in the last 2 months, just between the two of us. So it's been good. It's, I would tell any of you, get up here and do it. because it's amazing what it does, your own self-reflection. And I've actually got 5 new major questions that I've got to start thinking through. And studying and searching and I say studying, some of them are actually actions I need to do, and Nancy knows what those are, but she and I talked about them and I fell off the horse. So I've got to get back to it. And one of them is really being more intentional in my prayers with God. The second one is being intentional, looking for the silence in the moment and listening. Because he's so there. He is so there. And I will tell you this, at our family dinner table every night, I always ask, what are the 3 things that you're grateful for from your day? Because you know what, there's enough bad stuff that happens out there, but what are the 3 things you can be grateful for today? And my daughter sometimes says, God help me through X. And I'm like, that's great. Because if he helped you get through this, or God helped you do something else, you know what, whether you did it with the help of God, and that's what I want to hear. And for me, that's the best reflection at this point in my life, is helping her come on her own faith journey, creating her own faith journey, and continuing that. I would challenge all of us to continue our own. Anything else?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mark, thank you for being